Welcome to the Swayam MOOC course NGOs and Sustainable Development, Unit 5, Module 40, Challenges in the Implementation of Environmental Legislation. This is the last module in this course. Learning objectives. By the end of this module, you will be able to learn about the challenges being faced in the implementation of environmental laws. Understand how these challenges can be overcome. Let us now see what are the obstacles and difficulties being faced while enforcing environmental laws. Over the past few decades, there has been noticeable increase in the cooperative international effort to safeguard and preserve the environment. The 1972 Stockholm Declaration on the Human Environment, the 1987 Montreal Protocol banning the use of chlorofluorocarbons, that is the CFCs, the 1997 Kyoto Protocol aiming to cut greenhouse gas emission and combat climate change, and its successors, the Paris Agreement, are just a few agreements which were put in force by international agencies to ensure that we protect and safeguard our environment. Furthermore, when one considers the existential threat being posed by the anthropogenic climate change and the potentially catastrophic consequences that humanity will face in the 21st century and beyond, the need for international cooperation in environmental protection and regulation becomes very relevant and very important. In India, the environment has become a significant problem in recent years. The environment is deteriorating daily as a result of the rising industrialization, rising population, urbanization, and several other reasons. Numerous organizations, legislations, and other factors are turning the wheel for improvement. The ineffective application of these regulations is the only thing standing in the way of increasing environmentalism in India. A nation's progress is defined by its healthy environment. Let's examine the state of the Indian environment, the steps done to enhance it, and the challenges that has been encountered during this process. The relationship between man and nature has always been evident in Indian history. Indian culture has exhibited a strong ethical and moral stance towards the environment throughout the time since the beginning of recorded history. We must trace its essence from the past to the present in order to study the current environmental conditions in India. Now let us look at the ancient period. Man and environment coexisted together in antiquity. He was reliant on nature for his wants and needs. He never intended to take advantage of the environment. Even with minimal advancements in the field of science and research, archaeological evidences from the Indus Valley civilization, cities that were present during those times, demonstrate the existence of environmental consciousness. Their construction of ventilated homes, clean streets, numerous wells, bathrooms, public baths, and covered drains demonstrates their concern for cleanliness and sanitation. Another sign of the concept of environmental conservation was the limited population that was present during those times. The ancient Indians held that social and individual behavior, whether positive or negative, does affect the ecological equilibrium. Every town was required to have a little jungle where different tree species were conserved. This requirement is comparable to the present day idea of social forestry. Numerous religious texts makes it clear that cultivating a garden, planting trees can help individuals increase their merits in everyday life. The religious texts in India highlight that we need to live with compassion and to consider the needs of the future generation. In the olden religious texts, they have outlined several rules for the preservation of forests. Cutting branches, breaking tree trunks, uprooting trees and felling trees without proper permission was carried out with penalties. Now coming to the medieval period. In the context of environmentalism during the Mughal era, it has been noted that rather than taking any deliberate steps in that direction, the Mughal emperors were considerably more interested in studying, creating and praising the natural surroundings as well as their constructions. Legendary are Akbar's attempts to encourage afforestation in common property resources, the management of water bodies and his opposition to the killing of animals. God condemns anyone who kills a cow according to old days tradition, chops down a tree or gives away a human being according to the passage from Abdul Qadir Badani's literature on ethics. Jahangir made commendable efforts to enable the cultivation of high altitude trees like the cypress, juniper, pine and sandalwood in the Indian plains. Only royal family members were allowed to hunt during the Mughal era. The Mughals have examined their surroundings more like a naturalist rather than an environmentalist, but their efforts nonetheless contributed to the long term preservation of the ecosystem. Now coming to the modern period, that is prior to independence. With the arrival of the East India Company in India, the overexploitation of Indian resources started, and that was the period when industrialization also began. Their primary goal was to bolster the British finances by importing raw materials from India and establishing several factories. Around 1806, the British cleared all the trees along the Malabar teakwood forests. The British government implemented regulations that limit the cut down of the trees and those trees which were allowed for trading. The Charter of Indian Forests was enacted in 1855 and it made the case that teak lumber should be kept as a state property and its commerce was rigorously monitored. In 1864, the first Inspector General of Forests was appointed for organized forest management. There were 4 kinds of forests which was identified in the 1894 forest policy. They are the forests whose preservation was necessary due to physical and climatic factors, forests that provided good timber for industrial use, inferior types of timber which were produced in little amount in the forest, and pastures that solely for by name was referred to as forests. Many people criticized this program because it failed to recognize the rights of forest residents and allowed the government to exploit the forests unchecked. The Forest Act of 1927 provided by the British government, they provided exclusive authority to the British government and it went in for exploitative goals in some instances. Some of the other acts that was enacted by the British government was the Shore Nuisance Bombay Colaba Act of 1853, which regulated the waste which was discharged in the coastal areas. The Oriental Gas Company Act of 1857 was imposed to restrict the pollution of rivers and waterways. The Chapter 14 of the Indian Penal Code 1860, creating the offence of nuisance, attempted to protect public health, safety and tried to prevent environmental degradation. North India Canal and Drainage Act of 1873 allowed free flow of canals and rivers for irrigation and drainage. Wild Birds and Animal Protection Act of 1912 prohibited hunting of wild birds and animals without the permission of Forest Department. Apart from the above enactments, several other legislations were also carried out, such as the Poisons Act of 1919, Indian Port Act of 1908, the Boilers Act of 1923. All these were concerned with the preservation of the environment and conservation of the natural resources. Now coming to the post-independence era, that is after 1947. The Indian Constitution entered into existence in 1950, but until the 42nd Amendment was incorporated in 1976, it lacked any specific provisions that was dealing with environmental preservation. However, the Constitution contained sufficient clauses enabling both the Union and the state government to enact legislation for environmental protection and preservation of the natural resources. On the basis of these constitutional clauses between 1947 and 1972, some of the significant laws that were enacted included the Factories Act of 1948, the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act of 1954, the River Boards Act, the Mines and Mineral Regulation and Development Act of 1956, the Atomic Energy Act of 1962, the Insecticides Act of 1968. Only after the Stockholm Declaration did India begin to focus on the bigger picture of environmental conservation. The Stockholm Declaration was held during 1972. Comprehensive special environmental legislation was passed by the Indian central government. In 1972, the National Council for Environmental Policy and Planning was established. This was later converted into a Ministry of Environment and Forests, which was again converted to Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change during 2015. The Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 sought to regulate the wildlife in a logical and contemporary manner. Pollution control boards were established, and this was also to prevent pollution at the industry and factories. Now, however, in spite of all these acts that was enacted, there was no proper implementation of these environmental laws in India. Although India's environmental rules were very strict, the population, the public did not follow it properly. Despite there being a court specifically for environmental cases, India continues to have a high pollution index on the global scale. India presently holds 177th position out of 180 nations in the Environmental Performance Index. The execution of environmental laws in India is a little questionable. Our natural resources are depleting at an alarming rate as a result of fast industrialization, deforestation, increasing population growth, lack of environmental awareness among the people. Despite having several environmental protection laws, regulation, judicial activism, constitutional clauses, India still ranks 177. This embarrassing display of Indian environmentalism demonstrates to us that despite having environmental protection laws in place, the country is unable to do due to the ineffective enforcement of these laws. The non-profit Center for Science and Environment in New Delhi is led by Sunita Narain, and he states the policy department is fine, but implementation is a challenge. Weak deterrence still exists. Since the accountability structures have been undermined, monitoring becomes a major issue. Some of these issues could be environmental governance and excessive governmental control. Though there is a Ministry for Environmental, Forest and Climate Change, yet the ministry enacts the laws, gives all the provisions, but it is not given the full freedom to enact and take justice to their laws that they have enacted. The second is lack of political will and public awareness. In India, politics and governance are primarily concerned with issues such as voting rights, economy, technological advancement, etc. Environment is consistently not regarded. Additionally, the population is ignorant of the harmful consequences that environmental deterioration has on their health as well as other related factors. Additionally, because of the technological transition happening and the financial constraints India is facing, environmental laws and enactments are not given the important priority. National agendas have prioritized economic expansion to be more important over environmental protection. Further, there aren't any severe penalties where there is no compliance. For example, the penalties for breaking the Water Pollution Control Act is not very strict. Next, coming to the third issue, lack of independence to the control boards, the state control board and the central pollution control boards. The state and the central boards don't have much independence. They still have to rely on the state government and the central government for various procedures, for orders, for appointments. 4. Lack of funds and legal authority. Pollution Control Board lack the legal standing and the government frequently overrides their decision. The funding comes from the tax that they levy in the industries and to the common man. So, central boards are finding a lack of financial crunch and hence their decision making power also is a little lax. 5 is the environmental litigation. Since expert witness and technical evidence are required in any environmental litigations, it is more expensive than other types of conflicts. 6. Less elastic laws. India's laws are not very flexible. They disregard other categories and place emphasis only on a certain set of harmful compounds, a certain set of factories. 7. Polluter pay principle is a very good principle which could be adopted, but regardless of the purpose, sometimes harm is done than justice. 8. Judiciary weakness. More than 2/3 of the state and the union territories don't strictly adhere to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change instruction with as well as the Supreme Court ruling. The judiciary is already straining to get through several cases that is before it, several PILs, public interest litigations that are before it, and these matters have to be resolved in a very speedy manner. 9. Laws are human centric. Most of the laws are created with people in mind. They prioritize human growth over environmental protection. Exploitation of the natural resources is set aside in some instances and human advancement is given more priority. 10. Population. India's population, as we all know, is rising very rapidly. More number of people put a greater strain on the environmental resources, the natural resources. It also introduces numerous concerns such as poverty, unemployment, etc., which diverts the authorities' attention away from environmental issues. 11. Urbanization and industrialization. Urbanization and industrialization are two phenomena which is getting accelerated in India, which is again because of population rise over the past 3 decades. As a result, everyone is caught up in the frenzied dash for advancement without taking the exploitation of the environment into consideration. 12. Permission. Industries must obtain authorization from the State Pollution Control Board before releasing effluents or emitting emissions. But because there aren't any severe penalties, sometimes they take it in a very casual manner and they don't get the necessary permissions. Now, what are the possible solutions to overcome these issues in implementing the environmental laws? 1. There could be an independent regulatory body. Without the influence of the government, there must be a separate entity which is in charge of enforcing these environmental rules in a very strict manner. This is also presented in the discussion paper which was presented by the Ministry of Environment and Forests, Climate Change, that a National Environmental Protection Authority can be set in place which can monitor, regulate and enforce the environmental governance. The polluter pay principle, if used as in the case of Vellore Citizen Forum versus Union of India, can be enforced in a larger manner, in a more positive manner. According to the Tamil Nadu Agricultural University Research Center, 35,000 hectares of agricultural land are no longer suitable for agriculture entirely as well as in part. It was decided that the industries must compensate the villagers for the harm they have caused as well as for the environmental restoration. So, such enforcement, such public interest litigations have to be taken up immediately and has to be resolved. Second is high civil liability. In terms of environmental awareness, citizens are now aware of their obligations and rights. Third, The penalty and punishment mechanism should be properly enforced. Every rule that has been passed must be implemented with strong penalties and severe consequences to those who break it. 4. Removing the loopholes. The RTI Act of 2005 gives every Indian citizen access to information about laws, policies, but it also has certain flaws. The transparency of the governance has to be rectified so that it's not necessary through the RTI that we need to get the information. Every information has to be given as a mandatory disclosure to the general public. This will ensure that there is a proper execution of environmental protection legislation in India. 5. Environmental Laws Amendment Bill. The Environmental Law Amendment Bill attempted to fine offenders 50 to 100 million rupees for harming the environment. However, this bill was not passed in 2015. Considering the environmental damage being done, this may be required for India to practice better environmentalism. 6. Sustainable development. India must pursue sustainable development in every aspect. 7. Polluter pay principle. As previously said, the polluter pay principle may be an effective manner in which India can ensure environmental laws are effectively enforced. 8. Lower court participation. The lower environmental courts are crucial to accept more PILs and improve the implementation in addition to the National Green Tribunal. 9. Focusing on environmental progress. It is necessary to put into practice the laws that prioritize environmental development over human growth alone. 10. Environmental jurisprudence. A strong ethical framework for environmental development is provided by environmental laws. As a result, it is essential for advancement of environmentalism in India. 11. Public awareness and political will. Public awareness and political will are two factors that are crucial for the implementation and observance of environmental legislation in India. 12. Boards must be made independent. They must be given the autonomy in their decision making and they should be able to enact and implement the laws in an independent manner. Overall, the lack of adequate enforcement mechanism for international environmental laws is a problem that is relatively common to international legal framework according to the United Nations report, despite ongoing efforts by international bodies to establish global standards for environmental protection and greenhouse gas reduction. In recent years, it is being realized in all quarters the urgency to give back to the planet Earth what we have consumed in large measures during the last century. As in the days past, unless there is a reverential respect for what the Earth has provided and is providing, it is not long before the Earth crumbles and takes its natural recourse in various ways. It could be climate change, earthquake or tsunamis, to name a few. It is the responsibility of every individual to protect our ecosystem. Eco-spirituality is the understanding the relationship of all human beings on earth and recognizing the interdependency while appreciating the values and maintaining the eco-balance. Eco-spirituality also includes a manifestation of the spiritual connection between human beings and the environment. Taking cue from all these definitions in my research, I have defined eco-spirituality as having a reverential attitude towards the environment in taking care of it while dwelling within the premises of the earth. The concepts related to this definition include feeling oneness with the universe, respect the surroundings, know the risks involved in creating an imbalance to this ecosystem, understand the ethical dimensions in preserving and conserving nature, perceive a sense of awe are some of the concepts while we define eco-spirituality. According to this definition, an instrument has been developed to measure eco-spirituality and it is available in the journal Eco Psychology Volume 11, Number 2, title Eco Spirituality, a scale to measure an individual's reverential respect for the environment. All developments in this universe focus on improving the quality of life of human beings. However, it is necessary that environmental sustainability is kept at the core of any development. When an individual corrects themselves, the society corrects itself, and the universe will automatically start moving towards sustainability and towards sustainable development. NGOs, the operational arm of the government, will help us in achieving sustainable development. The role of NGOs is very important towards this function. Now, let us see a few questions and answers related to this module. Question 1. What are the challenges of implementing the environmental policies? The most critical obstacles as per the Environment Performance Review report are the lack of political support for environmental goals, the ineffectiveness of environmental institutions, in particular with regard to implementation and enforcement, the inability of government to mobilize financing even for established environmental priorities, the still weak environmental policy integration, and finally, the failure to establish and use monitoring mechanisms to measure the progress. Question 2. What are the environmental challenges of the 21st century? The most serious environmental problems of the 21st century have the potential to alter the course of life in this planet. Global warming, toxic waste, water and air pollution, acid rain, shrinking energy resources are the frightening challenges that may threaten our future and our future generations. Question 3. Why are environmental laws implemented? The main job of environmental law is to protect the human health as well as the environment. It is all about maintaining an eco balance. The role of environment is to ensure that the practices used in the environment do not cause any harm to the environment, the human beings, the animal, organisms living in the earth. India being a large country both in terms of the spread population, laws and enforcements are required on one side. On the other side, every individual need to deem it as their own responsibility to ensure that we protect our environment, we protect our natural resources, we do not consume or use more than what is required, and we go for sustainable options as we use the nature resources. So, we need to consider whenever we take up any resource whether it is a sustainable option. We need to ensure that whatever resource we use, whatever product we use, whether we can recycle those products. In such simple ways, we can conserve the natural resources, we can protect our environment, we can maintain our eco balance. So, to summarize, in this module, we have learnt about the challenges being faced in the implementation of environmental laws, understood how these challenges can be overcome. So, with this session, we complete all the modules for this course. I hope you enjoyed the session and we have enjoyed this teaching learning process. Thank you.